recording of the presentation as well.
Okay. So I'll kick off. Because I've got you on full screen, I can't monitor the chat at the same time. So perhaps if there are any kind of questions, we can save that for certain points within the presentation. So good morning. Well done for making it indoors, not being outside, and enjoying the sunshine. And thank you for Ealing and Hounslow CVS for organising today and having me along. I think one of the obvious downsides, many downsides of the current situation, but not being able to get out and sort of meet you in person, I think is a real shame. I'm one of the grants managers at Trust for London, and I cover Ealing, Hounslow, Haringey, Barnet and Enfield. And what that means is I'm the sort of key contact for those boroughs, and when applications come in, I might normally be the first person to assess them. Trust for London, we are a proactive funder. We're very supportive towards our grantees, and we have a really strong emphasis on learning, development and capacity building. And the work that we fund seeks to address poverty and inequality, and that's the core focus of our funding programmes. So what I'm going to do today is talk you through our funding programmes, and there are 7 different areas. But perhaps before we kick off in a minute, I'll just ask you, maybe I'll come out of the presentation and just perhaps in the chat, if there are particular programme areas that you're interested in, it'd be really good to know, because then as I go through, I know where perhaps I might need to kind of spend a bit more time. But normally I'm often asked to talk a bit more about our Connected Communities programme, which is for smaller groups. So I'll try to take you through them all briefly, and then we can come back and talk about them in a bit more detail. And hopefully this will give you a sense of what sort of work we can support and what we won't support.
Hi, Lee.
Hi. And then I can answer any questions. And my email will be at the end of the presentation. So I'm really happy to have one-to-one conversations with you afterwards if you'd like to get in touch. And I'd also recommend having a look at our website where you can see a bit more information about some of the projects that we have funded. So annually we provide around £11 million in grants to approximately around 120 organisations. And at any one time we're supporting between 300 and 400 organisations across London. In terms of sort of values and things that we identify as important, we're really mindful of how poverty and inequality is experienced differently by different groups. And for example, some of our work has a particular focus on deaf and disabled people's organisations, and a strong emphasis on trying to address racial and ethnic inequalities and racial injustice as well. I think in terms of thinking about, so these are the programmes, but I think just thinking about the activities that we fund, and I normally sort of think about that in 3 ways. So firstly, advocacy. And by advocacy, I mean campaigning work, and it might mean influencing the local authority. It might mean organising around a particular issue. It could be policy work, so responding to consultations, publishing briefings and research or action research. So that's advocacy. The other thing that we often fund is advice, and it depends, what level of advice depends on the programme area, but it could include housing legal advice, employment, social security legal advice, and specialist immigration legal advice. And all of those areas are normally at a specialist level, other than Connected Communities, where it might be more generalist advice, but you would need to be, it would be about improving the quality of an existing advice service. So that's advocacy and advice. And then the other area is around capacity building. So within sectors, for example, housing and employment. And a common thread through all of our work is the emphasis that we place on helping to build power and influence of people with first-hand experience of poverty and inequality. So we place particular priority on funding user-led organisations, and we're very keen to support organisations and groups that are led by the communities that you're serving. So the average grant that we make is around £80,000. It's rarely more than 150,000, but our upper limit is 200,000, okay? And that's under our main programme, and it would normally be spread over 1, 2 or 3 years, and most grants are 2 or 3 years. Occasionally there might be a 1-year grant if it's for a feasibility or a pilot study. And then I'll get on to this. You can see that sort of last on the list there is connected communities. And in July, we changed the threshold for that. So it has changed. So if you've looked at that before, you may now be able to apply for it if you weren't in the past. We had an upper limit on the annual income that an organisation had as 100,000, but now we've lifted that to 300,000. And we used to have a limit on what you could apply for at 60,000, but we've now lifted that, and that's to make that particular programme open to more organisations and groups. So I'm just going to come out of this, and if it was a smaller group, I'd be able to ask everyone to do introductions, but I'm just wondering if in the chat you could tell me which organisation you're from, and if already you know there's a particular programme area that you would like me to focus on. It might be that you don't know until I've gone through them. So, but yeah, I'll just give you a minute to pop in the chat. That would be great.
Hello, Rebecca.
Hi, Mindu.
Mindu Baines from Trenchant. Actually, we are a volunteer group who looks after the community health and well-being. Our group has always been very, very active, and before pandemic, we were getting our small grants from Hounslow to carry on with our projects. But in pandemic, we have approached again council to give us help to carry on with our well-being, health and well-being program. Mm-hmm. So I probably will fall into your last community area. So we are looking for a grant for 3 years. Our group has majorly women over 60 and above, and all are done by doing our physical Bhangra exercises, then playing harmonium and playing other instruments to keep our minds and body active. Mm-hmm. Now, in order for us to carry on with this, the small grants, they are only lasting us for a few months. And then we have to go back again into getting more grants to carry on with it. And that gives a pause in doing so. So I was just wondering if we were to apply for 3 years so that we don't break in between our activities such as table tennis, doing Bhangra, learning music, Indian music, and learning other well-being activities. Would we be able to get a grant? Although it may not be too much, it'll be like £10,000 for 3 years.
Okay. So yeah, thanks for your question. And I think maybe once we've been through the funding programs, it might be a bit clearer. I think one of the things just to bear in mind from what you've said already is around in terms of thinking about the activities that we can fund. So that's mainly around the sort of campaigning and advocacy work and advice work. So if it's sort of more generalist sort of community activities and health and well-being, whilst incredibly important, that doesn't currently fit within our funding guidelines and within our remit. So you know, we are a charity as well, and so we have a particular kind of purpose, and so we have to stick to that and follow the guidelines that our grants committee set. So more generalist sort of health and well-being is not something that we would normally fund. It needs to be tackling poverty and inequality. And I'm just going to, so we can come back and talk a bit more about connected communities, but I'm just going to have a quick look through the chat so far. Catherine's asked, is 300,000 the maximum income threshold? No. So we would not normally fund organisations with an income of more than 2 million. It does sometimes happen when it's a much larger national organisation and then they have a maybe London-based project, but that would be our upper limit. It's for connected communities, which is our small grants programme, and that would be the upper threshold of 300,000. I'm just having a look to see if there are any other kind of questions here. So I can see connected communities might be where people are potentially focusing. Okay, all right, well, that's really helpful. I'm going to take you back to the presentation, so just bear with me a second. Okay. Okay, so good homes and neighbourhoods. So that covers advocacy work, So this might be around affordability, around the provision of housing, around tenants' participation and improving neighbourhoods. And you could either be seeking a grant just for advocacy work or just for housing legal advice, or sometimes a bit of both. Often we'll see housing legal advice, and then from that organisations might then kind of be working with communities to campaign locally on particular issues. And a lot of that we see is around the private rented sector. I think sort of other examples of what we are funding locally, we're funding the West London Equality Centre, and that's funding over 2 years for a housing advisor who will provide help and support legal advice and casework for people living in private rented accommodation. And we're also funding Ealing CVS over 2 years, and that's for a development and campaigns officer to increase capacity of the voluntary sector organisations working with disadvantaged residents. I won't go into too much detail on that one because I'm not sure how relevant it is for people today. Better work. So we want better work for everyone. We want people treated with decency, at least to receive the London living wage, and to have stepping stones for progression. So the focus under the Better Work strand is not around getting people into work. It's around progression and about, you know, we recognise that people often get stuck in low paid work. So it's around how we can help people to progress. We also fund employment legal advice and advocacy work. I think sort of, I'm not sure that we're sort of funding any projects around better work in Ealing and Hounslow, but example, something we're funding up in Enfield, Haringey and Newham is Fraser, and that is for services to enable members of the Albanian speaking community to move into better work, and often a sort of group of people that are often in precarious or exploitative employment. Decent living standards. So we want an inclusive and responsive welfare and support system. So this is about trying to support projects that work to ensure people have an adequate income. We see that incomes need boosting, but also to bring down the high cost of living. For example, we fund Citizens Advice Hounslow for a full-time welfare specialist, and that's around meeting increased demand for complex welfare rights, casework and representation locally. And we also fund sort of campaigns relating to decent living standards. For example, we fund Sustain's London Food Poverty Programme, and we also fund Child Poverty Action Group for their London Calling project, which is around trying to highlight any issues that are arising around the kind of welfare and benefits system by sort of that children and families are experiencing across London. And they're doing some work to amplify the voices of low income and low paid Black and minority ethnic Londoners. So Shared Wealth, this is a programme that we probably fund the fewest amount of projects around, but that's around tackling economic inequality in London. So we've recently funded a block of organisations to do research and policy work around inequalities in wealth and the housing and property market in London. Pathways to settlement, this one potentially could be of interest. This work is focused on new Londoners, so people who are often disadvantaged, living in poverty, and for migrants who do not have legal status and are often vulnerable to exploitation. So we fund, again, a mix of legal advice and campaigns. So we often fund law centres, perhaps an immigration advice worker, and we also fund campaigning work, so the Migrant Rights Network, Refugee Action, Anti-Slavery International. So Stronger Voices, and this is one, in my experience, we do get quite a few applications through for, but often people, we're sort of trying, what we have done is try to tighten up the explanation in our funding guidelines. And this is for work that enhances the capacity of civil society to be involved in influencing policy and social change. But particularly you do have to touch on or be looking at issues relating to our other programmes. So it'll be around capacity building, for example, around housing campaigners, or around employment projects across London. That could include community organising and advocating for specific policy changes. It could be around strategic communications, and it could be around voice. And so those are sort of 4 different strands. So you wouldn't necessarily need to hit all of those. It would just be about these are sort of areas that we're keen to support. Okay, connected communities. So I think this is one that that is potentially more kind of relevant to you here today. So we recognise that small groups make a significant contribution to improving the lives of people in London, and community groups. We're looking for groups that support people to access services or speak out on issues that affect them. So we have the strengthening voice element. So that could be around a local campaign. What we need to see is that it is specifically targeted at or supporting people who are experiencing poverty and inequality, to campaign on solutions to issues that they're facing or long-standing problems in communities. And we also fund advice work. So that's around supporting groups that already provide social welfare advice and more sort of generalist advice, but to improve the quality of that advice. And we place particular priority on organisations that serve and are led by people from Black and minoritised groups, and those led by deaf and disabled people. But we do also fund other groups as well, but that's where the priority it currently is. And by led, we mean that 75% or more of the Board of Trustees or Management Committee and 50% or more of the staff self-identify either as deaf and disabled, if it's work for deaf and disabled people, or there must be people from Black and minoritised groups if that's who the work is focused on. But like I say, we will also consider applications from other community organisations that are led by and for the communities that you're serving. So by small groups, we define that as organisations with an annual income of under 300,000. It was 100, but 100,000, but we've now upped that to 300,000. And there isn't an upper limit on what you can apply for. Although just sort of bearing in mind things like your annual turnover and income, if you're suddenly doubling it through this grant, that might be something that we maybe have a closer look at. So it just needs to sort of, we don't have a specific sort of percentage figure that we're thinking of, but it's just about trying to make sure that you have the capacity to be able to deliver that work, and we're not sort of suddenly growing the organisation beyond your kind of experience and the sort of current work that you're doing. I think just to give you some examples, we fund Hadia for their welfare rights advice and support worker and the drop-in advice service that they provide in partnership with Ealing Law Centre, and we found Elays for support services to Somali women in Hounslow. And I think what we really want to do is try to encourage organisations, in particular in outer London boroughs, to be applying to us under Connected Communities. But do speak to us first. I mean, hopefully I can answer some of your questions today. But what's really frustrating and disappointing is seeing applications coming in that don't fit within our funding guidelines, because we know how much time you spend putting applications in. So we want to make sure that when application does come in, that you've spoken to a grants manager, you've been in touch with us in advance, so that we can kind of support you and make sure that that your application has a likelihood of going through. So just things to think about in terms of our shortlisting criteria. So these are all listed in our funding guidelines. But I think the things to bear in mind is we don't accept applications from individuals, and we can't accept applications from organisations that have fewer than 3 trustees. And we would normally expect more than 3, but we have a sort of minimum level of 3 trustees. We can't fund work that is around the promotion of religion, but that doesn't mean that your kind of core purpose as an organisation can be sort of faith related, but the work that we are funding cannot be specifically to promote religion, and we can't consider applications if you've been rejected by us in the last 12 months. So I'm often asked about health and well-being. So we can't fund projects that are specifically focused on health and well-being. We do know that there are often sort of overlap in terms of poverty and inequality, but poverty and inequality is our focus. And I think just in terms of tips about when you're thinking about applying to us is have a close look at our guidelines and just don't be afraid to get in touch. So in terms of our closing dates, they're always fixed in February, June and October, and our next closing date will be the 5th of October. and it's normally a 4-month turnaround. So you will hear within 4 weeks whether you've been shortlisted, and then the time from the deadline for the initial application through to the grants committee and a final decision being made is 4 months. Alongside grants, we also support organisations through social investment. So if you have an income stream that you're looking to grow, that might be something that we can support. That isn't an area that I cover. So we have social investment manager, and so that's sort of run by other colleagues at Trust for London. So if that's something you're interested in pursuing, I can link you up with them. Something that we've recently launched with Crowdfunder is the Local Action Poverty Fund. And so we can provide up to 10,000 in match funding for community groups that are tackling poverty and inequality in outer London boroughs. So there are 2 grants that are available. One is up to £1,000 to get started. And then there'll be like a short entry form online, and then you need to provide match funding. And then there is up to £10,000 available for bigger ideas. Now, this is something we just launched at the start of July. So again, if this is something you're interested in pursuing, have a look on our website or drop me an email. I can link you up with Abbas, my colleague, who's responsible for the crowdfunding. Okay, a couple of other things just to sort of have a look at on our website. If you're putting in applications, not just to us, but to other funders, we have London's poverty profile, and there we collate data across a range of different areas, whether it's housing, employment, child poverty, food poverty, and it's broken down by boroughs. So if you want to get a picture and get some of the data of what's happening in Hounslow and Ealing, you might be able to sort of find that data there and be able to use that in applications to other funders. So there's my email, rebecca@trustforlondon.org.uk. Like I say, really happy for you to get in touch with me afterwards, but hopefully we can just now open this up to kind of Q&A. If there's anything there that wasn't clear, or if you have a sort of specific project in mind and you'd like a bit of a steer on whether it's something we'd be likely to fund, I'm really happy to answer your questions.
Yeah, Rebecca, on the previous Connected Communities criteria, it talked about community activities led by communities in outer London boroughs. Is that being dropped then, or?
Yes, so we had activities in isolated communities, and it was one of the areas where we seemed to get the highest level of, well, we didn't feel that it was clear enough. We had a high rejection rate under that particular stream. And so sort of through various kind of internal discussion with the grants committees, it's now been narrowed down to advice and campaigning work. But the other thing we have done is now also been able to lift up that that £100,000 turnover limit that we had. So that was preventing a lot of organisations from applying to us. So now we've lifted that to 300,000. And also the other kind of significant thing is where organisations could only apply for a grant of up to 60,000. We've lifted that particular barrier as well, so that more funding is available to organisations.
Rebecca, can I ask a question?
Yes, I can't see who's asking the question.
It's Mindu.
Oh, hi. Okay, yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I couldn't see you there.
Well, it's still because yours is with the poverty and inequality. Now, but is there anything you're going to do for our kind of voluntary group? Like I previously explained that we do for health and well-being. So is that nowhere into your system?
No, so you know, we have money, but we have finite resources. So our grants committee and our board have had to take a strategic decision about where our funding can be made available, because we already get a lot of applications. How we can narrow it down and also make it clearer to applicants. So we won't fund projects that are specifically focused on health and well-being. That doesn't mean an organisation can't be doing that work. But if you're applying for a grant from us, it would need to be for activities related to tackling poverty and inequality. So it might be around advice work. or it might be around campaigning and sort of advocacy.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to ask a question, if I may. I'm Ade Banjoko from an organization called Parents Action and Resource Center. From listening to you, Rebecca, it seems as if the connected communities strand would be good for us, because we actually are engaging already with the local authority. You know, we have a number of meetings already. We're a group of volunteers, we're grassroots led. My question is, what experience does your organization have working with groups such as ours, you know, from the African and African Caribbean communities, or from the BAME communities, understanding our particular challenges in terms of accessing funding? You know, I'm interested to know what work have you done, or has your organization done, to get to know the intricacies, some of the challenges, you know, organizations coming from the BAME community face? Because I want to know that when I'm putting an application in, if I'm going to spend time doing that, you understand the challenges. For example, we don't have somebody who is, well, for our organization, we don't have somebody who is a full-time, you know, some person, expert writing applications, so on. So, yeah, could you respond to that, please?
Sure, that's a really good question, and I know it's something that is quite rightly being posed to a lot of funders at the moment, in terms of sort of our understanding around the challenges that community groups for minoritized communities often face in accessing funds, and some of the discrimination that kind of exists within the funding environment. It is an area, in terms of sort of our history and the organisations that we do fund. We fund a high proportion of organisations and groups that are led by Black and minoritized groups. Now, obviously that covers a wide range of categories, but I know through sort of analysis of our funding and the grants that we distribute, that there is a high proportion, although I think we can always do better. In terms of our assessment processes, we work very hard to make sure that, so you won't be penalised because if English isn't somebody's first language, or if the grammar isn't correct. We understand, especially for small organisations, you may not have professional fundraisers, and actually we're quite good at spotting the applications from professional fundraisers, and we actually want to see something that's a bit more authentic from a group that understands the needs of the local community and are looking to respond. So I would say we're kind of very open and actively encouraging organisations to apply to us if you're specifically serving the Black and Black community. And we are also working with other organisations such as the Baobab Foundation, and we are part of the Funders for Racial Equality Alliance as well. So it's something that we're kind of reflecting on and working towards as well. But in terms of our application processes, like I said, please do get in touch, do speak to us in advance, and we want to work with organisations. So, you know, the application doesn't need to be 100% perfect. If there is a proposal there that meets our guidelines, that we feel that we will be able to take to committee, and then we're really happy to work with organisations on your application and to try to make sure that you get the support that you need. TP Singh, I can see you put your hand up.
Hi, Rebecca. Yeah, my name is TP Singh from Punjabi Theatre Academy. We basically specialize in acting training, and we're looking fund to set up training institute for the film acting in West London. Those people who are unable to afford it because there's high expenses, so we can train this for 1 year pilot scheme for acting for film and theatre. They can learn script writing, direction behind the stage. So can we apply fund for the community, connected communities, which when they get benefit from us, to give them employment opportunity, because they can't afford it. And West London, especially in Southall, there's no any academic institute who can offer those people who are interested, but they can't afford it. So we are looking to connected community as a pilot scheme for 1 year.
Okay, I think it's probably unlikely in terms of us being able to fund training in the arts. Where we may have funded more arts-based projects could be around the voice element. So if it was around a specific focus around sort of activities that were focused on elevating the voices of people experiencing poverty and inequality in a particular area, whether it's around housing or living conditions. So I think it would be unlikely, but I'd be really happy if you want to send me through a sort of brief summary or paragraph. I can take another look at it. I'd be more than happy to have a chat with you.
Thank you so much for feedback. Thank you.
Shanjit, you have your hand up.
Yeah, hello, good afternoon, Rebecca. I'm Shanjit from Sunshine of Hounslow. Just want to inquire, do you cover the project for environmental side as well? So like if we grow food and donate it to the community disability allotment, and which we engage people also donate the food to the community on regular basis to beat the crisis of the poverty and food, and their main needs are food, daily food. So,
again, I think it's great work that you're doing, and I know that it's been particularly important during COVID as well, and really sort of part of the emergency response in terms of food provision and supply. Unfortunately, that isn't something that we would normally fund. It may have fallen under isolated community activities and isolated communities, but it's not something that we're able to fund going forward. Where we have been able to support maybe food banks would be where advice services are running out of those food banks. It's about linking people up so that they can access welfare benefits and advice around their rights. But yeah, unfortunately, I don't think it's something that fits within our guidelines.
That's fine. Thank you very much. But I would rather engage people to start growing food rather than just sit and get the food and eat. Make an easy option for everybody. That means we are not making the economy to work, so they can sit and eat. But our aim is to engage people and make them to grow food and learn how to the process of the food as well. But that's fine. The fundings are always available. But thank you very much for your answer.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Craig. I work with Action West London. I don't know if you know about Action West London. We are a small to medium charity helping people into employment, educational training. We have a number of different projects from different, because we aim to help the disadvantaged backgrounds. We've been around for 23 years now, and yeah, we have a number of different projects that we have ongoing at the moment in the West London area, and we also now pan London as well. So we are growing. It'd be great to understand if we could work together and possibly help.
Yeah, so your focus is on around is around sort of employment opportunity,
employment, education, and training, and enterprise.
Okay, so I think if there are particular areas there which is around sort of progression from low paid work, but then if there's also so have a look at the Better Work program. What sort of size are you? What's your annual income?
Over $1 million.
Okay. So I think, having a closer look at the Better Work programme, whether you're providing employment legal advice, I think something to look at more closely could be advocacy work. So if there's sort of local campaigns that you're running around improving pay and conditions in particular sectors.
Some of them things are in the contracts with the primes, these sort of legibilities. But yeah, it'll be something to look into, the Better Work. Are you going to send some more information out to us directly so I can share with the board?
Yeah.
And we can speak to the trustees as well.
Well, I think what I'll do is I'll ask Ian to share a copy of our funding guidelines, because I think that's where you get some of the details. So the slides are helpful in terms of having the headlines, but having the funding guidelines is much more useful for you to have a look at. So just going back also to TP Singh and Shanjit, it might be worth having a closer look at the crowdfunder, because as long as you're sort of targeting work at people who are facing poverty and inequality, the sort of boundaries around that are probably a bit more open, but the only thing is you need to be fundraising for a specific project or initiative and doing some of the funding, fundraising yourselves, and then we do match funding. So it's sort of slightly different from grant funding. But yeah, and Craig, do come back to me if you've got some specific questions. I'd be really happy to look at a proposal.
Is the crowdfunder, is that ongoing, or is it a sort of a specified time period?
I'm due to get a presentation on it from colleagues next week, but my understanding is that funding is available for the next 2 years for that. Whether it will continue after that, I can't guarantee, but I think it's something that will be available definitely for the next sort of 12 to 24 months.
And Rebecca, this would be through any platform that they choose?
Through Crowdfunder. So it's a partnership with Crowdfunder, so it would need to be through their platform.
Okay.
I can see I've got a question from Roger. Yeah, we wouldn't, so Roger's asking whether we would be able to fund bursaries to residents in Feltham. I'm not sure that's something we would be able to fund. So we don't fund projects where it's about them redistributing grants, although I guess that's slightly different. So I think if you want to get in touch with me, I'll be happy to have a bit more of a conversation with you, unless you want to sort of talk about it briefly now. Any more questions? Also really happy in terms of feedback around our guidelines. I know it can be really sort of frustrating if things don't seem to be quite kind of neat fit in terms of work that you're doing. But yeah.
Any more questions?
I'm also going to be putting in the chat link a link for the feedback for today's session, and be happy if you could take a minute. It won't take more than 60 seconds to just click on the link and give us your feedback if there are no more questions for Rebecca.
And I've just put a link to our funding page as well, where there's a PDF version of our funding guidelines and information on how to apply.
Can I ask one last question if no one else has something to ask?
Hi, Yusuf.
Yeah, Ms. Rebecca, I was asking, about the monitoring and reporting.
Yes.
Is the trust have another option? For example, like Word for All, they give you an option after you finish the end of the project. They give you two options, either to report the outcomes, or if in a sort of a survey where they ask all the questions they want for an outcome. So because of timeline and capacity building, so most small organizations, they prefer the online one because you are asked all the outcomes of the project. It's like an online return.
So are you talking about the training that we provide for evaluation and monitoring, or are you talking about
after the project? Yeah, after you finish the project, you ask two kinds of monitoring reports.
Yeah.
To be same.
So
it's like because of the digital inclusion, they're doing one. Either you can directly reply the way we do to Trust for London, or they give you another option. They ask all the questions with the project in terms of online, what they are looking for an outcome.
Okay.
So you can either do online report or you can do direct one.
Ah, okay. Yeah. So the way that we normally do our reporting is that we would ask for an
they do like a survey. They do like a survey.
Ah, okay. No, I'm not familiar with that. Who does that?
Award for All.
Okay, Awards for All. Okay, I should have a look at that then.
That model, if you can have a look at it, please.
Okay. Look that up. Thank you. Okay then.
I think everybody's happy, I think.
Yeah.
If there's no more questions, thanks, Rebecca, very much for your time. I'll send the slides and also the link which Rebecca's put into the detailed funding criteria.
Yeah.
And obviously, you can get in touch with Rebecca if you've got any specific questions. And thanks for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank you.